Sam and Faith have been fighting and playing right outside of my room, so that's really distracting. Hey y'all, my name is Nat. I hope you're having a terrific day today, and for this video we are going to be doing my September wrap-up. Before I get into anything bookish, however, make sure to hit like and subscribe down below, as well as tell me in the comments, did you DNF any books this month? And if so, what were they? Alright, so if you watched last month's wrap-up, I did a bit of a poll where I was deciding whether or not I was going to continue forward with doing wrap-ups or if I was going to shift into more of a recent read style. I actually ended up deciding to go with an idea from Rita at Life Worth Reading, where basically it just depends on my reading month. This month, I actually had a lot of books which I didn't read for specific videos, so I will actually have a decent amount of reviews for you. But sometimes if I do have more books for videos, then I might just end up deciding to do a recent reads at some point whenever I feel like I have a decent amount to fill a video. Now onto the usual start of a wrap-up. First is my stats. I read 13 books this month, and across those I read 4,987 pages. That does include converting audiobook hours to pages, but in terms of audiobook hours, I listened to roughly 77 of them. Honestly, I think taking Faith on a walk every morning has really helped my audiobook count. My average rating was 3.73 stars, so not as fantastic as last month, but I only had one DNF in comparison to 3 in August. As for my genre breakdown, I had 1 contemporary book, 2 fantasies, 1 graphic novel, 2 horror, 2 mystery, 1 nonfiction, 3 romances, and 1 sci-fi. In terms of the little goals I set for myself, I did complete a big book this month, a book that is more than 450 pages. Technically it was a rollover from August, but you know, I finished it in September, so we're counting it here. And then obviously off of my genres, you can figure out that I did complete a nonfiction and a comic book also. To make things easy on myself, I decided to order my reviews just in terms of when I finished them, so we're gonna start at the beginning of the month. The first book I read was The Ravens by Cass Morgan and Danielle Paige. This was a Becca recommendation for Bookoplathon. I went into this hoping that it would give me similar vibes to American Horror Story Coven, but there was way too much focus on the dramatic teenage romances for my taste. This story is following 2 college girls, 1 senior, 1 freshman, who are within a sorority, which is actually a coven of witches in disguise. We have our junior, who is hoping to become the president next year, Scarlet, and then our freshman, who is just now finding out that she has powers, Vivi. As I said, unfortunately for me, I think there was just way too much focus on petty drama and this very obvious mystery that springs up in the second half of the book. The biggest strength was the magic system. I thought it was really cool. It was very based in elemental magic. It had some ties to tarot, and I thought that was really interesting, but it just seemed so underutilized. Anytime we were seeing the layout of the sorority and how this coven works within society, I was hooked by that, but those moments started to become more and more rare the further into the book I got. As I said, we're alternating perspectives between our 2 main characters. Vivi, who is a freshman and has never really had a home for herself. She and her mom moved around a lot as a kid, and because of that, she is hoping to find a true sisterhood within the sorority. On the opposite side, we have Scarlet, who is a seasoned junior and comes from a long line of powerful witches. Of course, because of that, she is dealing with family expectations. Each viewpoint was signified at the start of the chapter, and I never really had a issue keeping the 2 of them distinct from one another. Obviously, given the fact that there are 2 authors, I assume one wrote for each of the main characters. I do think that Vivi and Scarlet were the most well-rounded out characters, though still kind of bland in my opinion, and towards the end I felt like they just started to act more and more out of character for what had been established to us previously. There is this idiotic love square thing that causes so much drama and tension between the 2 girls, and it just seemed so unnecessary. It felt really forced and immature, as though it literally was only there to cause animosity between the 2 of them. I just think that time could have been so better used building up some of the side characters, furthering the magic system, maybe even building out that mystery a little bit more so it wasn't quite as obvious. I guessed the who and the why of the mystery that takes place at the start of it, meaning I never felt like there was really any stakes. There were a few sleuthing scenes here and there in which Vivi or Scarlet are trying to figure out what has happened to their sister that disappeared, and those were sort of unsettling. Seeing as how I thought the entire romantic square thing was dumb, no, I wasn't convinced by either of the romances and had no faith in them. This was just an average read, pretty underwhelming. There's actually a sequel called The Monarchs, which I assume is continuing in the next year of the girls at college, but I don't think this needed a sequel. I'm not going to continue with this. This was 3 stars. Next up was my big book, which rolled over from August, and that was Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. This book was originally annotated by my friend Kat for our friend Allie. Allie read it and annotated it and then passed it on to me so I could read it and annotate it and then gift it back to Allie when she was visiting. It was a very entertaining reading process, and the usual summary everybody gives is that you are following a man who wakes up on a spaceship, has no memory of who he is or how he got here, and you are simply following him along as he tries to put together the pieces of what he can figure out on the spaceship. Honestly, I do agree with everybody else. You shouldn't know anything apart from that going in. I did know a few things here or there which I've picked up from people talking about it, and unfortunately, I do think that kind of detracted from my enjoyment. Even with that, this just wasn't really my kind of thing. I think on the whole, I did enjoy it. There were parts that would definitely make me laugh out loud. A few times I did feel like my heartstrings were being tugged at, but this book is over 450 pages and I just was kind of bored for a lot of it. What I've always heard about Andy Weir's books is that all of the science is true and realistic. That's fine and dandy, but I don't care about that when I'm reading a sci-fi book. There are numerous little experiments that our main character runs to try and find an answer for his newest question. All of them felt so tedious, I finally ended up skimming over them. I didn't need every single bit of science in this book explained to me, only for the paragraph to end with a TLDR version. Why not just cut that out? In terms of characters, with the summary I gave you, you can guess that we really have one main character who we are following. He's fine, kind of a plain John for me. The humor around our main character is really quirky, and at the beginning I thought it was fun, but towards the end it just was starting to lose its charm for me. One thing I don't hear anybody talk about is the fact that like we do see occasional flashbacks to before our main character was on this ship and him slowly starting to remember things that got him here. I did not realize that, so the first time it happened I was so taken off guard. We do see a few other characters from those flashbacks and we do start to get some actual answers, but in terms of pacing, this really would trip me up every single time we would cut away for one of these scenes. The issue with me telling you to go into this book as blind as possible is I can't praise the one element that really won my heart in the story, but if you've read the book, you know, and I agree, I love it too. That really saved the latter half of the book for me. The plot idea felt pretty original, but I'm also not very well versed in sci-fi, so take that comment with a grain of salt. I liked the layout of the book. I liked the up and down in terms of tone and emotion. I liked the twists and reveals. I was pretty intrigued throughout majority of the book, but by the time we finally got an answer, I had just spent a lot of time bored, and honestly, I think my ending comment is just, I felt like this needed editing. Personally, it just wasn't my cup of tea here. I gave it a 3.5 stars. I finally understand what everybody talks about with Andy Weir's writing, but like, still not my thing. After that, I did a bit of a surprise buddy read with Nina at Books with Neen. We read 4 Aunties and a Wedding by 𝗖ścienih𝗁𝗁. This is the follow-up to Dial A for Aunties, and this was disappointing. Seeing as how this is a sequel, I can't really give much of a summary, but I can say we are basically following the same family from Dial A for Aunties, and it's filled with all of the ridiculous shenanigans, very reminiscent to the first book. However, I think it took what was charming and fun in the first book and kicked it up another notch and just made it too much and ridiculous. A lot of the time, the comedy was riding that line between being funny and cringy. Some of the jokes just felt like they were a bit too drawn out. Unfortunately, I was definitely suffering from secondhand embarrassment in this book. Oh my gosh. I still love our main character of Mehdi and her relationship with her aunts, though I still enjoyed the romance because there is a second chance romance which happens in the first book. I just wish that the romantic partner would have had a bigger role in this one. My biggest gripe with Mehdi throughout the entire book was just that she was consistently lying to her future husband and wasn't being honest with him after all of the drama that happened in the first book. The plot was fine. It has its up and downs, and given the comedy, which could be really ridiculous, it rode that up and down with the plot. Nina and I actually both guessed the ending reveal at chapter 5, so we spent most of the book just kind of waiting for the characters to put it together like we had. So in the end, I wouldn't really say this is a bad book. It was just disappointing and honestly, I think kind of unnecessary. I gave it 3 stars, unfortunately. Next, I read my nonfiction book of the month, and that was Lady Killers by Tori Telfer, and I really enjoyed this one. So every chapter in this book follows a different female serial killer from history, and the author explains a bit of the background about the killer and then how they came to start murdering people, some of the story of that happening, and usually whatever their ending demise was, with an occasional discussion on the public's reaction to these crimes. Majority of these women I'd actually never heard of. I knew who the first one was, but after that I was mostly in the dark. The author comments in her conclusion that she specifically chose to go with killers from history. I think the earliest one is from like 1950s instead of more recent cases, and I think that worked really well with the theme she was trying to discuss here. It's easier for us as readers to distance ourselves from these crimes when it's been so long, but it also ensures separation of negatively impacting the families of the victims. She gives a variety of women from a variety of places all over the world in different time periods with different methods, though unsurprisingly, poison does get brought up quite often. Telfer continuously brings up how female serial killers are often dismissed as not being terrifying in comparison to male killers. I really liked that element and I really wanted her to take it a little bit further every time it came up. But overall, the tone of this is very relaxed. It's almost like you're having a conversation with someone about their favorite serial killer from history, which makes sense seeing as how Telfer apparently hosts a historical true crime podcast. There's also creepy portraits to introduce every single chapter, and if you pay attention, there are little clues as to maybe how they committed their crimes, and I thought they were really clever while also pairing very well with Telfer's style of storytelling and just the entire aesthetic of the book on the whole. Across the board, I really enjoyed this. It's pretty light. Definitely made me start diving into some of these killers to learn more about them, maybe pick up specific biographies about them too, and I'm definitely going to be checking out Telfer's newest book, which is apparently about different con women. That sounds like it'll be a fun time. In the end, I gave this 4 stars. Next was Good Girl, Bad Blood by Holly Jackson. This completed the emoji generator prompt for Bookopoly-thon and also finally got me to continue the Good Girl's Guide to Murder series. Now, obviously this is a sequel, but I can tell you that this is following our main character of Pip from the first book. She is obsessed with mysteries and she has recently started running a podcast revolving around the case she solved in the first book. Guys, this was so freaking good. Oh my gosh, mad Veronica Mars vibes, and as a self-declared marshmallow, I was a big fan of it. I forgot how well Jackson is able to weave this surprising mystery with a YA story. This book is dark, but not in a gory, violent sort of way that you often get with mysteries. The way grief and trauma are showcased and the writing around Pip whenever she is in shock is just haunting, so perfectly putting you into her mindset. The development around Pip's character just felt shockingly grounded given the fact that we're reading a mystery story where a teenager is outsmarting the police. I can't believe I took so long to continue this series. I read the first one for my YA mystery 5x5 and I blasted through the second one just as fast. Every time I was listening to the audiobook, I was completely absorbed. Highly recommend going that format because this also does follow the multimedia element that the first book had. It was so fast paced and it really just makes you feel like you're a part of the story. The podcast element also definitely made me compare this to Sadie by Courtney Summers, and it lived up very well. The relationship with Ravi from the first book continues in this one also. It is very cute. It adds a little bit of levity to the story. And also I just love Pip's dad so much. I just wish that the side characters in the first and second book both had more build up to match alongside Pip. So in the end, I gave this 4.5 stars. It was so freaking good. I can't believe it took me this long to continue this series, but on that note, I then picked up As Good as Dead, which is the third book. Y'all, I'm freaking mad. How did we go from this at 4.5 stars to a DNF Obviously, this continues on with the series. I really can't give any specifics because it will definitely ruin the 2 previous books. Again, we are seeing more of the trauma and the toll that solving cases is really taking on Pip because she's an 18-year-old girl. She really is not built for this kind of life. She's suffering from PTSD and probably anxiety and is basically thirsting for a new case to take her mind off her troubles. It really becomes apparent in this book how obsessive her personality is, to the point that she's no longer caring about any real consequences for her actions. It's a dark portrayal, but it also makes perfect sense for the character development we've seen over the last 2 books. With that, it does make for a lot slower start at the beginning of the book, but I didn't really mind it. Once she finds her new mystery, things picked up and I was hooked. I kept on listening, though I really started to grow frustrated with Pip's lack of logic. What really surprised me, however, were the events in the middle of the book. It felt like this should be the climax. It felt like this was the ending, but I was only halfway through. Also, I actually called a major plot twist in this, which has never happened to me with the previous 2 books. I was really caught off guard by that, even more so by another event which occurred, and it's so hard to talk about this without getting into spoilers. What the hell? It felt like all logic literally just went out the window. It was childish, and though the writing still made it seem like Pip was being logical, she wasn't. She was being emotional and vindictive. The reaction other characters had to her was just incredibly out of character for everything that had been established to us previously. I get how Pip has changed from the beginning of this series. What she was doing just did not make sense for anything we'd known about her previously. Because of that, my interest just completely dropped. I had a few other friends who rated this poorly on Goodreads, so I messaged with them, and after coming to the conclusion that this was not going to get any better, I DNF'd it and decided to just look up the end, and can I just say I am very, very disappointed. So yeah, I DNF'd this. Okay, next we are getting into a lot of the books that I read as a part of that 24-hour readathon I did, so I'll put a link to that vlog over here where you can kind of hear thoughts in real time, but let's do a quick rundown of these. First is The Inheritance of Orquidea Divina by Zoraida Cordova. I'm actually going to have a full review of this book in a video coming out sometime in the future. I don't really know when yet. I also read the entirety of Part of Your World by 𝗖ście Jimenez. This is a romance book which has been getting a lot of buzz lately. This is a age gap romance between a doctor who stops in this small town, and she falls for the mayor, who is 10 years her junior. The 2 of them kind of become friends with benefits and then eventually start to try and make this long distance relationship work. Along the way, there's a lot of factors which are causing issues between the 2 of them. I was kind of surprised. I really enjoyed this a lot more than I was expecting to. I just don't usually enjoy age gap, and I will say in terms of the age gap, I don't like how it was handled here. The female main character constantly reminding us of how much younger the man is, and then also calling him like a kid. It was weird. I don't like how that was handled. Anyway, I've been meaning to check out this author's works for quite a while now because my best friend loves her original series, and I was finally forced to do it after said best friend picked this book for our book club. I genuinely laughed out loud so many times while reading this. I think Jimenez writes humor incredibly well. With the whole small town versus big city feel, this definitely reads like a Hallmark movie. Can't be too mad about it because it did have some serious discussions of toxic and abusive relationships in multiple different forms. That element added a little bit more substance. The topic of abuse, it did seem like it was pretty well handled, looked at in different relationships, in different types of abuse, and seeing how victims learn to cope with said abuse. The healing we see through our female main character Alexis was just fantastic. Although I wasn't a big fan of the age gap, I will say in terms of romance, this was pretty sweet. I do think they had pretty good chemistry, though initially it's very insta-lusty. Great sexual tension as well, though I was wishing this was a little bit spicier. I guess I'd put it like 2 chili peppers. Also, this is split perspective. We see from Alexis and Daniel. Honestly, I just felt like Daniel was too perfect, and the side plot he has is pretty small potatoes in comparison to Alexis. So I really just feel like we could have completely cut out his perspective and it wouldn't have changed the book that much. Third act conflict was so incredibly obvious and so dramatic. Oh my god, it was so over the top. The reveal of how much time had passed in the epilogue did make me realize pacing was kind of strange in this. It was really fast, but there would be time jumps, and we would be told a lot of time had passed. But at the end, it's stated that it's been like a year, and that just seemed really weird for all of the things that had taken place to only have all happened within this single year. There is this sort of weird magical realism element that I mostly just turned a blind eye to, but in our book club, other people thought it was pretty weird. Across the board, I had a pretty good time reading this. I blasted through it really quick. I don't think this is one I would ever reread. It's not a new favorite, but I still gave it 4 stars. I still understand why so many people have been praising this. Gotta move the pumpkin a little. Also, in that 24-hour readathon, I read Spider-Gwen Volume 2 by Jason Latour and illustrated by Robbie Rodriguez. This just continues the series of following Spider-Gwen. Unfortunately for her, she has recently lost her powers, and we are kind of seeing the fallout of that. This was rough in comparison to the previous bind-ups. It just felt really jumpy. Events that would happen in each issue just seemed really disconnected. As a reading experience, it just wasn't pleasant. On top of that, this weirdly changes art styles midway through issues. At no point does the illustrator change, and I'm not sure what was happening there. I do still love that this doesn't shy away from the grittiness of Gwen's background, given how she got her start as Spider-Gwen. I was really impressed that this had the balls to take a jump or two in terms of plot, and excluding those dramatic changes, I usually really love the art style in this series. I love the Technicolor. I really appreciate the backgrounds that are set up. In particular, my 2 favorite issues were the Halloween one, where Gwen and her friends go to Mysterio's carnival, and the second, which sees Laura, the new Wolverine, and Gwen switching bodies. Both of those were a lot of fun. A letdown compared to previous bind-ups, and I went with 3 stars on it, but I'm still planning to continue reading them because I own the rest of the series. Duh. I also read Just Like Magic by Sarah Hogle, and for the time being, you're just gonna have to watch that 24-hour readathon vlog because I will have an official review a few more months down the line. I did, however, also continue the series of the Winston brothers. Is anyone shocked? With Beard in Hiding by Penny Reid. This continues off of the short story following 2 side characters. I was surprised. I did enjoy this. It's following some older characters, so we do see a bit of maturity. It's a nice departure from the usual layout of the series, and I also think that the characterization continued to be fantastic. I had no idea that when we initially met these characters in the first and second book, I guess, that I would come to care about them so much as well. With them being on the older side, this does kind of have a second chance romance, but like second chance in a different sort of way. I'm not going to go into specifics there, but we also see some fantastic growth from the female main character from where we originally met her in, was it the second book or maybe it was the third book? I don't remember. This does further the Iron Wraith's motorcycle gang plot that has been underlying all of these books, and I will say it's weird that this is labeled as 4.5 because I found out after the fact that this actually spoils some events that take place in the 5th book, so it's like, why not just put it as 5.5 instead of 4.5? I don't get it. Anyway, I gave this 4 stars as well. Still a cute addition to the series. Didn't quite love it as the regular Winston Boys installments. Then I finished the Book of Accidents by Chuck Wendig. Oh, technically I had 2 big books this month. Look at that, because this is a big book also. It's over 500 pages, which did not need to be, but we're not going to talk about that here because this will also have a review out in a video coming out in October, so keep your eyes peeled for that. Now we are on to my favorite book of the month, Hell Followed With Us by Andrew Joseph White. This was so freaking good. Actually, I originally picked this up as my most recent purchase book for Bookoplathon. It was so good. This story is following a young trans boy named Benji who, unfortunately for him, grew up in a cult which has banded to try and survive this apocalyptic world. These sort of zombie things have started to take over, and the cult has actually implanted a biochemical weapon into Benji's body. Benji is now on the run and ends up running into a group of teenagers, and he tries to survive along with them. I genuinely can't believe I enjoyed a dystopian book as much as I did, but Apparently, if you take a zombie apocalypse, mix it with cults, and then give us some fantastic queer characters, I'm gonna love it. Who would have thought? I was really impressed at how dark, gory, and visceral this book got for still being considered YA, but I also loved every second of it. This felt very reminiscent to zombie stories, which were really popular a few years ago, but with the added element of the cult, which really just, oh, that kept me so invested. White actually utilizes scripture and the twisting of religion to showcase how this cult has came to be, what their beliefs are, and how they have garnered such a following. I think it was just so fantastically well done. Along with that is the impact that all has on Benji's character. As I said, he grew up in this cult. We really see the struggles he has fighting against these beliefs, which he has had burned into his brain in comparison to his own morals and ethics. His arc was just so incredibly well done, and throughout the entire book, I both wanted to hug him and shake him almost constantly. On the opposite side, we do actually see a few times from the perspective of Nick, the leader of the teenage gang Benji joins up with. Nick is my favorite sort of character. That is a badass exterior with a cinnamon roll middle. Doesn't everybody love those? Nick is actually autistic, and I loved the way his stimming was showcased and how he would handle the pressures of leading this group. It showcased him in a way that wasn't weak or inhuman. His protectiveness over everyone in the group makes my heart soar, but the super soft, slow-moving relationship he and Benji have in this book, I'm melting. This is really heavy. Very, very heavy. It balances a horror story with a coming-of-age novel and a strong found family. These characters are all so young, surviving in this unforgiving place, and yet they still find happiness in each other and in being able to be themselves. There are a lot of phobias brought up in this book. A lot of them. I definitely could see the latter half events of this book being particularly triggering for somebody who is transgender, so please be mindful of that. If you do need content warnings, highly suggest checking them out. But I also think there are so many positives in this story and the ability for queer kids to see themselves in something that is not your traditional coming of age, finding yourself sort of story. Littlest negatives. The pacing can be very stop and go, which is a little jarring at times. The flow of the writing could also sometimes be disrupted by the biblical scripture that was dropped in. Overall, I loved this book so freaking much. I actually blasted through it really quickly. I highly recommend it. Came out to like a 4.5 on Copile, but I'm gonna rate this a 5 stars, 100%. Like I said, favorite book of the month. Please check out content warnings if you need them, but oh my god, this book was so good. And I'm so glad that it lives up to the beauty on the outside. Now, unfortunately, we are going to go from my best book of the month to my second worst, and that was A Study in Charlotte by Brittany Cavallaro. I picked this one up as multi-perspective for Bookoplathon. Many people had it marked multi-perspective on Goodreads, but you literally only see from Charlotte's perspective in the last chapter, so I don't know if this really counts as multiple perspectives, but I'm gonna say it does. This is the first book in the Charlotte Holmes series and was also the pick for the Story Continued book club, which reads retellings. With that, it was a retelling of Sherlock Holmes, and in this world, Sherlock and Watson were real people, and we are actually following their descendants. Mostly, we are seeing through the eyes of Jamie Watson, who recently has come to a new school in Connecticut and found out that Sherlock Holmes is a student as well. Shortly after they meet, a boy who has antagonized the both of them actually ends up dying, and they are framed for it. This was so disappointing. I was sold a enemies to lovers mystery story. I wanted to love the series so bad. This is not enemies to lovers. I don't remember who sold it to me as that, but somebody did. I know they did. This was more like horror first impressions, quite quickly to friends. I bought the first book because I was expecting to love the series, but instead what I got was a very underwhelming mystery and basically flat carbon copies of Sherlock and Watson. From the beginning, I do think this would have greatly benefited from showcasing Charlotte's perspective. Though she's just as abrasive and rude as Sherlock in every other kind of medium, she she doesn't really have the charm to offset it. He falls ass over tea kettle for her so quickly, and it's very hard to believe because it doesn't seem like there's anything that endearing about Charlotte. In comparison, Jamie kind of has some moments of depth, but overall he's pretty golden retriever boy meets hype man for Charlotte. What really drove me crazy with this book though is it's a YA mystery, and yet I was maybe 250 pages in before I ever felt like we were really getting into mystery solving. Most of this book is just Jamie following Charlotte around, gasping dramatically when she makes deductions. That's about it. Of course the ending reveal is shocking because literally nothing has been told to us. We never really get any sense of a motive. We don't really understand how all of this evidence can possibly connect together because she barely gives us any evidence. Overall, that just made it really frustrating. And then finally, something that I guess is kind of spoilery, but I think needs to be said is the handling of rape and drug use in this is just so poorly done and feels like they're purely plot devices. Don't like that. That feels really icky. I actually originally rated this 2.5 stars on Compile, but after reviewing it, I had to knock it down to 2 stars because I had such a poor time with it. I could see a younger YA reader enjoying this book. I cannot. And I'm really bummed. Okay, y'all, I have been talking for over an hour, so that is it for today. Thank you so much for coming to my channel. I really appreciate it. Make sure to hit like and subscribe down below. I have all my socials linked in the description if you're interested in keeping up with what I am reading. I come out with videos on Monday and Friday, but until then, I hope you continue to have a terrific day. Love you, bye!